This summer, our family took a great Canadian road trip. We packed the kids and all of our camping supplies into the car and headed far across BC and into Alberta. We camped in gorgeous provincial and national parks, experienced Calgary, which was a new Canadian city for us, and visited the dinosaurs in Drumheller. We had a great time. I really loved it all. And the experience confirmed that Vancouver trumps Calgary any day. The funny thing about the trip, though, is that despite the many long hours in the car with our young children, the driving was actually one of the highlights. Those of you who have made the drive on the Icefields Parkway or through the Rockies on Highway 1 know that it is one of the most spectacular landscapes on the planet. Driving along those mountain roads over and over, we were rendered speechless. Every time the road curved, a new perspective was revealed that was even more amazing than the last. Each new mountain peak or glacial river before us drew me in, and I felt a deep spiritual awareness and the urge to pray. Ma gadlu ma'asecha Adonai. How wondrous are your creations, O God. Uvtuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reshit. You renew the works of creation each day. I know this is not an unusual experience. One of the most consistent tropes I hear as a rabbi is when people tell me, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. I don't find meaning in prayer, but I find God in nature. This spring, I went to a rabbinic conference in Denver, Colorado, and learned from a wonderful colleague, Rabbi Jamie Korngold, who has carved out a rabbinate for herself by bringing Jews into nature to experience Judaism there, prayer, study, and community. She calls herself the Adventure Rabbi. And guess what? People are flocking to her. I am all for spiritual encounters in the natural world, and I am thrilled that so many people feel called to a life of spiritual wholeness. But I also know that the spiritual life that people are seeking on the mountain trail, yoga studio, or meditation retreat is accessible closer to home. Within Judaism, it's there. Our tradition supplies us with a spiritual practice of prayer, blessings, and observance that are designed to bring a sense of awareness, gratitude, and wonder to our lives. We just don't always know how to access it or prioritize it. For many of us as Reformed Jews who do not feel the obligation to pray in a minyan 3 times a day, prayer is not a priority. I mean, look at our sanctuary right now. Like ours, most North American synagogues are designed like this, with the flexibility to easily take down walls to massively expand our capacity for 10 days of the year. And we have an amazing group of shabbat and weekday minyan regulars who prioritize prayer in their daily and weekly life. But I would venture to say that they make up maybe 10% of our congregation. Prayer is hard, but for a meaningful Jewish life, it's essential. And many of us are missing out. Now, there are 1,000,001 factors that alienate Jews of every stripe and denomination from prayer. And one of the primary obstacles is this: a machzor, or prayer book. To begin, language is a challenge. The Hebrew, though profound in its depth is tough. If you are not a comfortable Hebrew speaker, the words come together simply as sounds and chants. True, Hebrew does bring its own level of comfort, even without comprehension. Our language is a connective tissue between the generations. Its cadences are traditional and beautiful and give us a sense of belonging and identity. But a language that is read but not understood can carry a high level of frustration. And people, by our own nature, do not like to feel ignorant. And the theology of the traditional language of prayer can be alienating as well. An Israeli member of our congregation, who obviously had no problem with the Hebrew, told me about the first time she came to services here. She couldn't get over the imagery in the Siddur. It was so patriarchal and black and white in its theological language. And she was made comfortable when Rebbitzin Kathy Bregman suggested to her, just listen to the music. And she did. The language of these holidays specifically can be challenging, with so much of the kingship imagery we just chanted, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. This year, the CCAR, the Rabbinic Association of Reform Rabbis, to which Rabbi Dan and I belong, published a new machzor. We're taking some time to determine if we will adopt it at Temple Sholom. That's another sermon for another time. And actually, if you are interested in a sneak peek, we will be exploring a small section of the new machzor on Tuesday as part of the second day service for Rosh Hashanah. But one of the main impetuses for the new publication was to allow for a broader range for encountering the divine than had been the experience with Gates of Repentance, our current machzor. And yet, despite all of the theological and linguistic challenges, the prayer book is what grounds us. It is what connects us to all of the generations that came before us. It's what ties us in our own time to Jewish communities around the world. And it keeps us focused on the important themes that make Jewish spiritual life possible. There exists a tension between that which is fixed and firm in our tradition and that which is made possible by our own personal inspiration and intention. The Hebrew words for these two ends of the spectrum are keva and kavanah. Keva is that which is rigid and unchanging, and kavanah is what comes from individual experience. Keva is following the words of our Siddur. Kavanah is the feeling that you bring from your heart. Between these two, we always struggle to find balance. If you take a moment and think about your own spiritual practice, what direction is your scale tipping? Are you setting aside time for regular prayer? Do you carve out time in your week for shabbat or weekday minyanim? Do you read the words of the Siddur by rote or with intention? Do you create personal moments for prayer when you feel yourself moved to do so? I suspect that today, for the large majority of non-Orthodox Jews, our scale is tipped too far in the direction of kavanah. We are good at capturing irregular moments of transcendence in the hike to the top of the mountain, the birth of a baby, or the bar mitzvah of our child. We seek kavanah and understand its importance, but we can't get there by just waiting for moments of inspiration. We do not live in the drive from Jasper to Banff. We live in the mundane, everyday moments of our lives. And no matter how much we yearn for the peak moments, we really cannot get there unless we commit to bringing more keva into our lives, living with a committed practice of prayer. The equilibrium between these two is very hard to find, and it is not simply a problem of modernity. 2,000 years ago, the ancient rabbis also struggled with this tension between keva and kavanah. After the destruction of the temple in the year 70 CE, they had to figure out how this new form of worship, that is prayer instead of sacrificial offerings, was going to work. There's a famous argument between rabbis about what this might look like. There were 3 rabbis, and they were debating about what blessings we should recite for the Amidah. In the weekday service, there are 18 of these blessings. Should a Jew be required to recite specific formula of prayers for these 18? Or would it be just as effectual to allow each person to bring their own prayer based on the themes that the rabbis created? As you can imagine, the opinions were varied and no one could agree. And along came Rabbi Eliezer, who said, if you make the prayers fixed, if you tell people how to pray, that is not true prayer. Formal, prescribed communal ritual not only leaves little room for the personal, it tends to stamp it out. And I am deeply sympathetic to Rabbi Eliezer's frustration. Yet I know that we could not do without our liturgy, because it is what teaches us how to pray. It gives us a language and an image of what it means to try to communicate and connect to the divine. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel once told a story about a town long ago that had all of the necessary municipal institutions a town should have: a law court, a cemetery, a hospital, a bathhouse, and many types of craftsmen. There were tailors, bakers, shoemakers, carpenters, and bricklayers, but the town lacked a watchmaker. Over the years, most of the town's clocks became what Heschel called annoyingly inaccurate. All of the clocks in the town showed different times. Some people stopped winding their clocks. They thought, why bother? And their clocks ran down. Others continued to wind their clocks day after day, year after year, even though the clocks did not keep accurate time. The years passed. One day, a watchmaker moved to the town. Everybody was so happy. People brought their clocks to the new watchmaker to be fixed. But the only clocks he could repair were those that had been wound, those that had been kept running. The clocks that had not been wound, these abandoned clocks had grown too rusty to be fixed. Heschel's message with this story is that prayer is important, even on days when prayers don't seem to work, even when our hearts are not into it. Someday the watchmaker will show up, and we'll be happy we didn't get rusty. So how can you make your own Jewish spiritual experience more meaningful? To create a practice of keva, of fixed spiritual time for yourself in this new year? Well, here's my rabbinic prescription. Start with 1. Start this new year with the practice of saying one prayer each day and making it a habit. Make it a steady, fixed part of your day. If you are a morning person, say Modeh Ani, the traditional prayer upon waking. Modeh Ani lefanecha, I thank you, God, for restoring my soul to me this morning. It is our prayer for the new possibility of each day. It invites us to approach each day as an opportunity to remember that every breath is sweet and each day is a gift. How would your day change if you began with this sense of gratitude to start each morning? And if you're not a morning person, perhaps you start with the bedtime Shema. It is our tradition that the last words one should utter if possible in a lifetime, are the words of Shema. And so we do this each night. Making a fixed time for prayer before you sleep gives an opportunity to review our day. And so each night we say the Shema before we drift off to sleep, to give thanks for the blessings of the day, and even on a bad day, to give ourselves an opportunity to put things into perspective. We live our days between these bookends, the Modeh Ani in the morning and the nighttime Shema. I surrender and entrust my soul to God. Every night I give it back, and every morning it's returned to me. What a gift prayer can bring to our lives with these regular moments of sacred living in our daily schedule. It is within the keva, the routine, that we will find voice for our own prayers. It will transform us. We will become prayerful people. There is great power in the commitment to daily spiritual practice. All prayer, when we pay attention, whether personal or liturgical, is ultimately a form of speaking the truth. It makes us aware of what is going on in our lives at this moment, so we can see clearly and respond appropriately. It is in the keva and carving out a routine place for prayer that we will start to see a change. The simple act of reciting the words will change you. Even if you don't feel its power on day 1 or 10 or 50, it will eventually become a part of you. It's like any commitment of practice. A marathon runner may wake up and say, I don't feel like running today, but I know that I have to if I want to run that race. There's also incredible power in the commitment to just showing up. The regular practice of being part of a spiritual community, dedicating yourself to being present as part of a minyan, brings a rhythm to our lives that leads to unanticipated awareness and meaning. Those of you who were here on Slichot heard David Coblin's moving reflections about his experience being part of our weekday minyan community. David made a commitment many years ago to come regularly to minyan after he came to say Kaddish and was disappointed by the low turnout. He realized that he had no real right to feel disappointed because he had not committed to show up for others in their time of need. He didn't feel particularly religious, but in the end, his commitment to showing up drew him closer to Torah and closer to God. And the caring that he received from this community that knew him in prayer was profoundly supportive this summer with the illness and death of his beloved daughter, Sandra. He had made a practice of being open in prayer, open and vulnerable in community, and that made all the difference when he needed it. Part of the brilliance of Jewish prayer is that it needs to happen in community. There is power in personal prayer, but the point of the minyan is acknowledging that you need community around you. What will be your commitment to being part of a Jewish community of spiritual meaning this year? Our liturgy on these high holy days claims that we stand in judgment before God, and that prayer, tefillah, is one of the 3 things, alongside tshuva and tzedakah, that diminishes the harshness of the decree. Taken literally, this might also seem dissonant, but I think that this verse is here to teach us that our very lives can be transformed by the experience of prayer. When we step outside the walls of the sanctuary, prayer helps us to answer questions like these in the affirmative. Am I kinder and more aware? Am I living a life of service? Are my relationships improving? Am I coping better with the stresses of life? Does prayer help me to mourn and grieve my losses in a healthy way? Like the mountain roads I drove in Jasper and Banff this summer, the prayer book can take you down unanticipated paths of wonder and meaning. The road is keva. It's fixed. It was laid down with asphalt, and the drivers are required to stay within the confines of its lines and guardrails. But every time you drive that path, your experience will be different. Our Siddur doesn't change. The words and choreography have been largely the same for millennia. But you are different. This year you will be different from the last. May it be a sweet new year, filled with meaning and transformation, keva and kavanah, a balance of spiritual nourishment for us all. Shana Tova.